Welcome to this tutorial on the many possibilities of settings on your Bernina L660 and L650. I'm Doris Breckbuhl, Educator and Overlock Specialist at Bernina International, and with one or two ideas, I've contributed to the development of these machines. In this video, you will discover how the different settings contribute to your stitch. In the description below, you'll find an overview about the chapters in this video, so you can easily navigate to those topics that interest you most. You select a stitch using the stitch selection chart. If you like to have some tips, which stitch for your specific sewing technique, on page 2 of the chart you find the Creative Consultant, where you can select your fabric, decide for your sewing technique, and we recommend you a stitch that is useful for your project. Depending on the stitch you selected, you have to insert the needles. Here we see that for 4-thread overlock, for example, both needles are in use, left and right needle, following the yellow and the green color code. For a wide 3-thread overlock, for example, you use one needle, following the yellow color code. For the narrow stitch, you use the right needle, following the green color code. For how to change needles, refer to our video tutorial on threading. Symbols show you which threading path to be threaded and which settings to be set. On the stitch chart, you'll find the default settings for the various stitches. The defaults refer to universal overlock thread. The thread tensions are individually adjustable from 9 max to 1 minimal. For different stitches, such as flat lock for example, the settings are different, and for wrapped overlock as well. However, often it is that different thread and fabric combinations require a slightly different thread tension. For more on optimizing stitches, refer to our video tutorial on stitch selection and stitch optimization. The upper looper converter. This symbol refers to the upper looper converter. These stitches are sewn without upper looper thread. On how to use the upper looper converter and the effect it has, refer to our video tutorial on threading. Let us have a look at the cutting width and how it connects to the stitch width. Most stitches are sewn with a cutting width default of 6. The cutting width is adjustable between 5 and 9. Stitches with the left needle can therefore be minimal 5 mm wide and a max of 9 mm. 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Same applies with stitches with both needles. They are at a minimum 5 mm wide and at a max 9 mm. When the right needle is inserted, it is at 2 mm distance to the left needle, making all stitches narrower. That means stitches with the right needle are at a minimum 3 mm wide and at the max 7 mm. For how to remove or change needles, refer to our video tutorial on threading. Of course, you can adjust the cutting width while sewing. Let me show you an example of changing cutting width from 5 to 9. you have always a suitable cutting width for your stitch. And of course, it does not only work increasing the cutting width, but also reducing the cutting width from 9 till 5 till 9. Fabric cutting or not. Deactivating the knife or not. I recommend to always consider a seam allowance and cut the fabric. If you deactivate the knife to avoid cutting, it may be that you have some loose ends on your edge. When you cut, your edge is nicer and your stitch more regular. However, I deactivate the knife always when I sew in a circle and my last stitches are sewn over the first. That gives me a nice and even edge. And very often also flat lock is sewn on a fold, for example here, resulting in a decorative stitch. Upon ending your sewing without cutting, when you deactivate the knife again, notice that it comes up a little bit only. Make sure that you don't place your fabric over the knife, but that you sew a few stitches first to engage the knife fully, and then you can comfortably place your project in front of the knife. Setting for overlock stitches or rolled hems. For most of the stitches, the stitch finger is on O for overlock. But you will see that better when I remove the presser foot. This is the stitch finger. When sewing overlock stitches, the stitch finger holds our threads and with this also our seam allowance. For rolled hem stitches, we set the stitch finger under the stitch plate and the chain will be built around the pin. And with this, our fabric will roll under. When you're done with your rolled hem stitches, don't forget to set the stitch finger back to overlock. I forget this often myself in the heat of the moment, and then my fabric edge is not nice and flat, but rolling under. For more on overlock stitches and rolled hems, refer to the videos under this link. What is MTC? MTC, Micro Thread Control. With MTC, we control the amount of loop or thread in our stitch. You can move the stitch finger towards the needle by setting it towards minus or away from the needles to bring more loop or thread into your stitch. At default, micro thread control is set to 0. With settings of micro thread control towards minus, you can prevent loose loops over your fabric edge. Or you can also avoid that your fabric is puckering or tunneling. Your seam allowance will be laying flat with the right setting. Of course, you can adjust micro thread control while sewing. And here you see the difference of loose loops or of a nicer and tighter stitch. You define the perfect setting for your fabric and thread combination while test sewing. And take note, While your stitch finger is set to R for rolled hem, micro thread control has no effect on your stitches. The stitch length has a significant impact on your stitch and seam quality. Most stitches are set with a stitch length of 3. 3 is ideal for most of the fabrics, no matter whether your stitch is narrow and fine or wide or comes in heavier materials. A stitch length of 3 comes also very nice for a picot stitch. The general rule is that heavier fabrics or wider stitches or heavier threads go with a longer stitch length, whereas narrower stitches, rolled hem, look nicer with a shorter stitch length. However, the ideal setting you define when performing your test sewing, whether it's for a woven fabric or a knit. And my tip, a longer stitch can reduce waving out of a soft knit fabric. On the other hand, a too long stitch can reduce elasticity, whereas a shorter stitch increases elasticity. You can adjust the stitch length anywhere between 0.8 and 4.5 while sewing. Differential feed, what does it mean? For me, differential feed is the most significant difference from an overlock and cover stitch machine to a sewing machine, because it allows me to sew wave-free seams in knits and pucker-free seams in fine woven fabrics. What differential feed does, we can see better when we remove the presser foot. The feed duct of overlock and cover stitch machine consists of 2 parts, a front part and a rear part. With differential feed, we adjust the movement of the front feed duct. At a default of 1, the front feed duct and the rear feed duct move at the same speed. When adjusting the feed duct towards 0.7, the front feed duct makes a smaller movement, holding the fabric back in the needle area. When I adjust the differential feed between 1 and 0.5 or 2, the front feed duct makes a larger movement, bringing more fabric towards the needles. We will look at the effect while sewing, but I recommend you sew yourself a sample with different settings. Here, in this soft knit, I've set differential feed to 1, slight waving out, 0.7, a little bit more waving out, coming towards 1.5, flat, and then it already starts to gather. So if you have a fine woven fabric, having the machine set at defaults, differential feed 1, you'll notice my seam is puckering. When I set differential feed towards 0.7, I can produce a flat seam. On the other hand, when I sew a soft knit with default setting, you see my fabric is waving out. I adjust differential feed towards 1.5. And achieve a nice and flat seam, waving out and flat. How much you have to adjust differential feed, you'll verify with your test sewing. And a tip, differential feed also prevents waving out of woven fabrics cut at the bias. You can also achieve a nice and flat seam. Differential feed is adjustable from 0.7 to 2 step-free while sewing. Differential feed 2 allows you to gather fine and soft fabrics. For gathering, I've set differential feed to 2. And soft fabrics gather. To increase the gathering effect, you can also adjust stitch length to the max, 4.5. And achieve the optimum of gathering. For gathering suitable are 4-thread overlock stitches and fine soft fabrics. Presser foot pressure, yes, but how much? You can adjust presser foot pressure from low, medium to high, whereas medium is the default setting and perfect for most of your fabrics and projects. But a general rule is fine fabrics and soft fabrics require less pressure. Stiff and heavier fabrics require more pressure. However, you define the optimal setting for your stitch and fabric while test sewing. Here, for example, you can see that the medium pressure is ideal for this fabric and stitch. With this thicker and heavier fabric, you see, however, that low pressure is better. So this is the exception of the rule. And in this fine fabric, you see there's no difference to the seam quality. And a tip, when sewing in elastic and stretching the material in front of the presser foot, increase presser foot pressure to high. And at the same time, you may also increase the stitch length for proper feeding. Presser foot pressure can be adjusted individually so that you always have the optimal feeding for your fabric. You have now looked at the different settings that contribute to the optimal seam for your project. What would you like to learn next? If you click on the link, you'll find more tutorials, for example, sewing stretchy seams with 4- and 3-thread overlock, sewing rolled hems, or cleaning and maintenance. If one of these tips has been helpful, give us a like. And we would love it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Bernina, made to create.